URL filtering. Here we'll learn about URL filtering security profiles and attaching URL filtering profiles. In order to provide the most robust network security model possible, the Palo Alto Networks firewall enables granular control over network traffic. Beyond only allowing or denying traffic based on source, destination, application, user, and port information, the firewall can examine allowed traffic for specific threats, including viruses, spyware, and software designed to exploit application vulnerabilities. Traffic also can be scanned for prohibited action, such as the distribution of sensitive data. For more information about the packet handling sequence inside of a PAN-OS device, see the Packet Flow Sequence in PAN-OS document available on the Palo Alto Networks support website at https://live.paloaltonetworks.com/docs/doc1628. URL filtering security profiles. Security profiles are objects that are added to security policy rules that are configured with an action of allow. Security profiles are not necessary for security policy rules configured with the deny action because no further processing is needed if the network traffic will be blocked. As with security policy rules, security profiles are applied to all packets over the life of a session. The security profiles represent additional security checks to be performed on allowed network traffic. Security profiles enable you to have more granular control over allowed traffic. For example, web browsing may be allowed by a security policy rule, but there is still the concern that users could download a virus from a website. An antivirus security profile can be attached to the security policy rule to detect, block, and log a virus. Security profiles log detected threats to the logs found at Monitor Logs. The URL category column can be used as a match condition in security, QoS, decryption, and captive portal policy rules. The URL category column can contain one or more Palo Alto Networks defined URL categories or custom user-defined URL categories. The action column in the security, decryption, and captive portal policy rules determines the action taken on the items listed in the URL category column. A URL filtering security profile provides more granular control for traffic allowed by a security policy rule. Like the other security profiles, a URL filtering security profile is applied only if the security policy allows the traffic. You can use a profile to assign different actions to specific URLs and URL categories for more focused web access control. For example, you can create a security policy rule to allow access to all web-based email websites, but attach a profile that blocks access to specific email websites. Access of a URL that matches a URL or URL category configured with an alert, block, continue, or override action results in a log entry in the URL filtering log. In the example URL filtering log, the user has applied the URL contains Craigslist filter to display only those web pages that have attempted to connect to Craigslist. Actions that require user interaction, continue, or override, log the initial blocking action and the successful user action. For example, if a user is presented with a continue response page and clicks the continue button, the firewall adds block continue and continue log entries. The Palo Alto Network's firewall includes a predefined read-only default URL filtering profile. URL filtering profiles enable you to monitor and control how users access the web over HTTP and HTTPS. The default profile is configured to block websites such as known malware sites, phishing sites, and adult content sites. The default profile cannot be deleted or modified. To create a customized URL filtering profile, clone the default profile and edit the clone. Alternatively, you can create a new URL filtering profile. By default, all categories are allowed in a new URL filtering profile. Use customized URL filtering profiles to minimize the number of blocked websites between more trusted zones, or to maximize the number of blocked websites between less trusted zones. In a zero trust configuration, no zone is completely trusted. You can configure each URL filtering profile with specific actions to take for individual URL category matches. URL matches to a block or allow list always take precedence over a match to a URL category. You can also configure the action to take if a user submits credentials to an allowed URL. The credential submission detection method is chosen on the User Credential Detection tab. If user credential detection is enabled, credential submission events are logged to the URL filtering log. You define the actions the firewall takes for the URL categories, custom URL lists, and external dynamic lists. You also define the actions the firewall takes when users submit their credentials to URLs. The available actions are: alert, allows the user to access the website, but adds an alert to the URL filtering log. Allow, allows the user to access the website, no log or user message is generated. Block, Traffic is blocked. A block log entry is added to the URL filtering log, and a response page is sent to the user's browser. Continue. A response page is sent to the user's browser that prompts the user to click Continue to proceed and logs the action to the URL filtering log. The log action is recorded as block continue when the response page is generated and is changed to continue if the user clicks Continue. And override. A response page is sent to the user's browser that prompts the user for the administrator-defined override password and logs the action to the URL filtering log. You can augment the predefined URL category list by creating your own custom URL category, which would be marked in the list by a asterisk. To create a custom URL category list, browse to Objects, Custom Objects, URL Category, and click Add. Create a list of URLs and assign the list to a custom URL category. For example, My Custom URLs is a custom URL category list. You can build custom URL categories even if a firewall does not have a URL filtering license. Custom URL category lists accept wildcard characters just like block and allow lists. The web UI includes the capability to import a custom category URL list from a text file or to export a custom category URL list to a text file. You can also augment the predefined URL category list by using external dynamic lists of URLs that are maintained on a web server and made available to a firewall by HTTP or HTTPS. External dynamic lists, EDLs, are marked in the list by a plus character. To configure access to an external dynamic list, browse to Objects, External Dynamic Lists, and click Add. Once you have configured a firewall with an EDL and performed a commit, future URL changes on an EDL do not require that you perform a commit. You can configure each URL filtering profile with an explicit block list and allow list. URL matches to a block or allow list always take precedence over a match to a URL category. Entries in the block list and allow lists are case sensitive and must match a URL exactly. For example, www.ebay.com is different from ebay.com. In the list, omit the HTTP or HTTPS:// portion of the URLs. You can configure a block list with the block, continue, override, and alert actions, which are described later in this module. The block and allow lists comprise tokens and separator characters. A token is a string of characters that are delineated by a valid separator character, such as a period, a slash, a question mark, an ampersand, an equal sign, a semicolon, or a plus sign. A token can also be replaced by an asterisk wildcard character. For example, *.yahoo.com, www.*.com, and www.yahoo.com/search contain the tokens *, .yahoo, www, and search. However, an asterisk cannot be included in a token containing other alphanumeric characters. For example, w*.yahoo.com is not a valid format because the W* token contains both a letter and an asterisk. You define the actions for the block list and the URL categories. The available actions are block. Traffic is blocked, a block log entry is added to the URL filtering log, and a response page is sent to the user's browser. Continue. A response page is sent to the user's browser that prompts the user to click Continue to proceed and logs the action to the URL filtering log. The log action is recorded as block continue when the response page is generated and changed to continue if the user clicks continue. Override. A response page is sent to the user's browser that prompts the user for the administrator-defined override password and logs the action to the URL filtering log. Alert. Allows the user to access the website but adds an alert to the URL filtering log. HTML block pages, whose size limit is 16 kilobytes, are displayed in the user's browser when a user attempts to access a URL or URL category with a configured action of block, continue, or override. Each page includes the user's IP address, the URL, and the URL category. The user's IP address is replaced with a username if user ID technology is enabled. A user that successfully uses the continue or override response page has access for 15 minutes to the URL category associated with the URL that generated the event and is not presented the response page again. This timeout time is configurable at Device, Setup, Content ID, URL filtering. The override password is set at Device, Setup, Content ID, URL admin override. A firewall can only have one URL admin override password. URL filtering response pages in a Layer 3 environment require the configuration of a Layer 3 interface on the firewall with an interface management profile configured to allow response pages. Response pages also work in a virtual wire configuration. A user must enter the URL admin override password to access a URL assigned to a URL category with the override action configured. A firewall can have only one URL admin override password at a time. The SSL TLS service profile can specify a certificate to use to secure the connection to the firewall when the mode is set to redirect. Transparent mode ensures that block pages appear to originate from the blocked website. The firewall impersonates the web server in the original request and prompts for a password. If it is an SSL connection and the browser does not trust the firewall certificate, the browser will report a certificate error. Transparent mode is required if no Layer 3 interfaces are configured on the firewall. Redirect mode ensures that the block page originates from the configured IP address or DNS hostname on the firewall. The firewall intercepts the request and redirects it to the configured IP address. The IP address must correspond to a Layer 3 interface on the firewall with an interface management profile configured to allow response pages. Redirect mode also supports session cookies and is the recommended mode. The URL admin override timeout specifies the lifetime of the override before a user must re-enter the URL admin override password for URLs in the same category. The URL admin lockout timeout specifies the waiting period that a user must wait after 3 unsuccessful override attempts. Safe Search is a best effort setting in web browsers that is used to prevent sexually explicit content from appearing within search results. The search provider, and not Palo Alto Networks, determines what is considered explicit. The capability of the firewall to detect a browser's Safe Search setting is provided with the weekly Applications and Threats content updates. Safe Search enforcement, if enabled, prevents users who use the Google, Yahoo, Bing, Yandex, or YouTube search engines from viewing search results unless their browser is configured with the strict Safe Search option. Users will see a URL filtering block page in their browsers if you enable this feature. If SSL is used, you must enable decryption for Safe Search enforcement to function. To help enforce safe searching, you could add a security policy rule to prevent access to other search providers. If the Log Container Page Only option is enabled in a URL filtering profile, only the URL of the main container page will be logged, not the URLs of subsequent pages that might be included within the container page. Because URL filtering can generate many log entries, you might want to enable this option. An HTTP request header might include the attribute value pairs user agent, referrer, or X forwarded for. To log these attribute value pairs in the URL filtering log, enable their corresponding options on the Settings tab. We highly recommend that you enable these options because it supports the analysis of indicators of compromise. Beginning with PAN-OS 8.0, you can identify and prevent in-progress phishing attacks by controlling websites to which users can submit corporate credentials based on the site's URL category. The ability to control access to phishing websites enables you to block users from submitting credentials to untrusted sites while allowing users to continue to submit credentials to corporate and sanctioned sites. Before you optionally configure credential phishing prevention, decide which method you want the firewall to use to check if credentials submitted to a web page are valid. Each method requires the configuration of user ID technology. The IP user and group mapping methods check for valid username submissions only. In these cases, the firewall will block or allow, based on your settings, the submission regardless of the accompanying password submitted. The domain credential method checks for valid passwords submitted to a web page. A URL matched to the unknown URL category indicates that the URL has not yet been categorized, so it does not exist in the URL filtering database on the firewall or in the URL cloud database. Although you might initially set the action to alert for unknown websites, you should always analyze the URL filtering log to determine known good websites and create security policy rules to allow them. Then you should consider blocking access to websites categorized as unknown. A URL matched to the Not Resolved category indicates that the URL was not found in the local URL filtering database and the firewall was unable to connect to the cloud database to check the category. Configuration of the block action for traffic that is categorized as not resolved might be disruptive to users. You could configure the action as alert so that users are not blocked by company policy, yet log entries indicate that URLs are not being resolved to URL categories. To verify current connectivity to the PanDB cloud service, use the command line command show URL cloud status. It should report connected. The connection problem could be temporary because of a lack of management plane CPU resources. Use the System Resources widget on the Web UI dashboard to check management plane CPU use. The initial seed database that you download to the firewall is a small subset of the PanDB database that is maintained on the Palo Alto Network's URL cloud servers. You download only a seed database because the full database contains millions of URLs, and many of these URLs might never be accessed by your users. When you download the Initial Seed database, you must select a region: North America, Europe, APAC, Japan, Latin America, or Russia, for instance, each of which contains a subset of URLs most accessed for the given region. By downloading a geographic-specific seed file, the firewall is able to store a much smaller URL database, which greatly improves lookup performance. If a user accesses a website that is not in the local URL database, the full cloud database is queried, and the firewall will cache the new URL in its local database. The Initial Seed data. Sometimes URLs are miscategorized in the PanDB database, which can block user access that should be allowed. Requests for recategorization can be submitted through the Request Categorization Change link in the Details window of a URL filtering log entry. The link redirects the browser to the Request Categorization Change form that submits change requests to Palo Alto Networks. The requests are reviewed by a human, so you must include comments. Requests are often processed within 24 hours. You can submit recategorization requests using the Palo Alto Network's Test a Site website. To access the website, browse to Objects, Security Profiles, URL Filtering, Add, and then click the Check URL Category link to open the Test a Site web page. Alternatively, type https://urlfiltering.paloaltonetworks.com into a web browser to open the Test a Site web page. On the Test a Site web page, type your URL and click Search. The details of your URL are displayed along with a request change link. To request a recategorization, click the Request Change link, fill out the web form with the details of your change request, and then click Submit. The Test a Site web page also is useful for discovering a URL's assigned URL category. Knowledge of a URL's assigned category is useful for configuring the URL category field in security policy rules, and also configuring the URL categories in the URL filtering security profiles. Attaching URL filtering profiles. The firewall supports the ability to create security profile groups, which specify sets of security profiles that you can add in one step to a security policy rule. For example, you can create a security profile group that includes security profiles for antivirus, anti-spyware, vulnerability protection, and URL filtering, and then assign that security profile group to a security policy rule. Use of security profile groups simplifies security policy rule administration. You can assign either individual security profiles or a security profile group to a security policy rule. To assign individual security profiles to a security policy rule, select Profiles as the profile type. To assign a security profile group to a security policy rule, select Group as the profile type.